Blood on the leaves and blood at the roots.
Hello, everybody. This is your VibeMistress Stephanie Renée. But on this series, Blood at the Roots, I'm more like your friendly neighborhood genealogist, sharing information with you, the first episode in quite a while, about how you can interpret all of this information that exists in the universe to help use the wonders of technology and your curiosity about genealogy to work for you. Now, if this is your first time tuning in, I'll give you just a brief kind of update on how this became a thing for me. Back in 2011, when I lost my father, he was the last of my living elders. And I decided that I was going to kind of jump in full steam ahead to do some research about how I came to be. And it turns out, after taking two DNA tests, that my background wasn't at all what I assumed it had been. And I found out that my mother was adopted, which took me down a long and winding path to put together not only the missing pieces of her history and her lineage that I didn't know, but also to kind of expand that to both sides of my family and not take anything for granted about what I thought I knew. And so as we are here at the start of a new year, and for many of you, that probably meant during the holidays, some of your relatives decided to take DNA tests and kind of jump down the rabbit hole. I hope that this sort of primer will help you to move forward with this information that you're going to be digging through as those results come back. So I have done kind of a top 5 of things to keep in mind as you begin this process. Number 1, capture your elders' stories. Now, hopefully, during the holidays, this was an easier lift for you because you had folks gathered around a table, kind of hanging out, and maybe then you began to absorb some new information because people were talking about days of yesteryear. If not, then I hope you will make a conscious effort to sit down with your elders while they are still with you and begin to capture those anecdotal stories about their childhood and anything that they remember about the details of your family lineage. Now, not everybody gets it right. And, sometimes people's faculties are beginning to leave them. So the details are kind of mishmashed, but everywhere in those stories is some kernel of truth that you can rely upon later as you go back and try and build out this information for yourself and hopefully for the generations that are coming after you. Now, one of the reasons why that is really important for me is because of this. What you see here are 5 of my great-grandmother's siblings on my paternal side. And the reason why this is incredibly important is because all of these women had passed away before I was born. So the fact that I can look at them and say from left to right, this is Mabel, Rebecca, Katie, Mary Alice, and Virgie, is because I sat down with my grandmother with this photo and many more, and she talked me through that information. It became incredibly important as I began doing my research because I couldn't go to any of these beautiful women to ask them about their stories. I've been piecing together their stories on paper, but at least I knew who they were and I knew their names. So I could begin to put those names together with the research and better understand who my family really is. So capture those stories while you can. Use that information as you begin building out your tree. Next, the only way that you will be truly successful at putting together your family history is to match DNA testing with building a family tree. That's the win. And I've already given you an example of how that was very relevant for me personally. I thought I knew the information. I began building a family tree based on those stories and based on what I had known, the people who had helped raise me. Turns out that although they are still my family and love them dearly, they were not my blood relatives. And so I began the process of learning about my mother's birth family after DNA testing, matching that information and building out a tree based on what I knew to be true. So that's not to say that you choose one over the other. Hopefully, if you're like me, you have a huge extended family full of people that love you. But the whole idea about building a family tree is to get accurate information about who's whose and how they connect to you. And the only way you can accurately do that is to have both the DNA test and the family tree. Now, here's the thing. There are a lot of people who will DNA test and they think that's the be all end all. I got it. But if you DNA test without the family tree, how in the world will you be able to connect all the results that you'll get with actual people, with actual lineages that you may or may not know? So you got to do both. You can build the family tree without the DNA test, but you can still be missing information because there may be relatives out there that you didn't know about. They came before you, whatever the situation is. You can put them on a tree. You can look, you have a visual representation of all of the people that connect to you down on a cellular level. Got it? Okay. Next, there have been a lot of system upgrades happening on Ancestry. Now, I don't have a preference of who you test with, but the information that you have accessible to you based on who you test with is important. And I'm going to show you a few examples of how Ancestry has been stepping up their game in terms of the levels of information that you have available. Okay, one of the first new features that Ancestry has offered is that they are allowing you now, through analysis of the DNA with you testing with them, to figure out who matches with you on what side of your family. Now, this is extremely helpful because what you can see here is that it has split me out, paternal side and maternal side. It points you in a direction of where those ancestors lived based on comparing your results to your matches and seeing where they live in the country or in the world. It gives you some surnames that are common between those trees to help also point you in a direction about who those common ancestors may be. But they also, on Ancestry, do not assume that they know it all down to the granular level. There are people who may have tested at various times, so they don't have the latest update of the test results available. And there are people who share smaller amounts of DNA with you who they may not be able to tell just yet where they are on your tree. So they are listed as unassigned. I've had some of these unassigned people become assigned as the test upgrade, as they log in, as they refine information on their trees, they begin to be parceled out to the right side. But there's still a lot of people, as you can see for me, who are unassigned, and that will continue to kind of work itself out as time goes by and as the systems become more and more effective. Another amazing new feature that they have added to Ancestry is to paint your chromosomes. Now, this is an inexact science. Let me say that from the door. This does not allow you to say specifically who you are related to by comparing your chromosome painting to another known relative. DNA doesn't work that way. But what this function does is look at patterns in your DNA that are common in other regions of the world and assign those sections to an ethnic background. Again, It's inexact, but it gives you a close approximation. This is important for Ancestry because this information was not available on their system prior to late last year, 2022. This was the domain of 23andMe. And in order to be competitive, Ancestry has been stepping up its game with its data in order to give you this information if you test it with Ancestry DNA. Now, as you can see, I always joke with people that I am overwhelmingly Nigerian. About half of my DNA is Nigerian, and that's on both sides. So I'm very comfortable with the idea that my migratory patterns and the transatlantic slave trade brought my ancestors from Nigeria through the Caribbean to the southeastern United States and mid-Atlantic United States. That's how my people got here. But this just gives you an example of how all of that Nigerian manifests itself in my chart, both on the paternal side. So you see, I clicked the tab and it gave you just the paternal side, and then also on the maternal side. That's what that looks at. I'm also almost all of my European DNA, we'll go back to this, comes from my maternal side. Now, that's not to discount the Irish that are a part, and the English that are a part of my paternal side, right? But when you break this down just to my maternal side, you see that a lot of that color stayed in the DNA. And there's lots of reasons for that we won't get into today. But again, this gives you a picture of how those ethnicities play out in the mapping of your DNA and the kind of information that Ancestry is using in order to make that possible. Okay. Now, one of the things that I learned amazingly as a part of this process over 2022 is that each service has its own incredible benefit and wealth of information for those of you who are serious about connecting the dots between what you receive in terms of DNA information, what you think you know on your family tree, and how to plug in the holes of what you don't know. Family Search was incredibly helpful to me because, as I showed you with my great-great-aunts, my great-grandmother's sisters, in that photo, I didn't know when any of them actually passed away because it was all before I was born. The Family Search databases had obituaries that I was able to connect to. And so I was able to plug in death dates for all 8 of the siblings. My great-grandmother was one of 8. And so all of that information with all of these people who passed away before I got here was available in Family Search. They also have lots of information that previously you would have had to travel to the county courthouse or the county seat for where your relatives and your ancestors lived in order to get some of that vital statistics information. Depending on the state, a lot of that information is now available on Family Search. Thankfully, Virginia, for better or for worse, kept meticulous records of the people that were enslaved there and the people who were just traveling through the state. And so because of that, I didn't have to make a trip like I was planning to do over the holidays to go to the courthouses. A lot of those birth registers and marriage registers that were previously held on those county seat in those county seat buildings are now available on Family Search. So they do DNA testing too, but their database on DNA is not as extensive as Ancestry and 23andMe. Ancestry has tons of documents, but not everything that Family Search has. So when you decide to dip your toe in the water, know that there are a ton of different services. Figure out the ones that work best for you. Family Search has a free membership that gives you access to a certain amount of information and to a lot of their searchable records. So take advantage of what you can get access to for free and figure out how to weave that into the research that you're doing. And finally, no expectations. Go into this process as much as you can with a wide open mind. You never know what facts have been omitted or slightly altered for your quote unquote benefit because of a determination by the elders and ancestors who have preceded you. Most of them were not mean-spirited in not sharing certain things with you. A lot of my elders told me, oh, well, you know, we suffered through this thing. We didn't think that that was something that you wanted or needed to know. Okay, I prefer to deal in truth. And so I'm glad that the technology has caught up with all of the storytelling ability and allowed me to dig through and find out facts that I'm thankful for at this point. And so the idea of what this will yield for you needs to be as impartial as possible when you go in, because it can sometimes be A, overwhelming, and B, leading you down a path that you never ever expected to see. And so if you go in with no expectations, then everything you get will be a blessing. And the response that you get, if you start reaching out to these relatives that you find through DNA testing, can be very, very mixed. Know that. And so there are going to be some people who will not be welcoming to you popping up on their family trees. There will be some people who do not like the idea that there has been a mixing of racial identifiers in the family. And so if you are reaching out to them just to understand how you're connected, some people will not receive that well either. So brace yourself for that. But that doesn't mean that every single interaction is going to be negative or that it will be closed doors in front of you. And I want to share one final picture with you to show exactly how joyous this process can be. This photo was taken on January 2nd, 2023. This is just a sampling of some of the cousins that got together on a Zoom call for me to walk them through some of the new information that I had discovered on our paternal side tree, well, my paternal side tree, but our collective family tree over the course of 2022. And this isn't everybody that was on the call. This was just what one of my cousins was able to gather on a screenshot during that call. More than 20 folks who were ready to hear what little old me had to share with them about our ancestors. And I'm so thankful that they so joyously joined into the conversation. And we are planning ways to continue to share this and to prepare branches of the family tree visually so that we can bring their children and grandchildren along on the ride for learning all about how we came to be. And I certainly hope that you and your family will have similar successes and be able to share all of this information so that the generations after you don't have to do as much work to put the story of you together. So if this has intrigued you in any way and you're interested in finding out more information about how I have kind of weathered this process and how I pursue more information about my elders, my ancestors, and who we are, then I encourage you to check out my website. In order to make sense of this, I started writing a series of articles that I call the DNA Journey on medium.com. You can go through and you can read any or all of these articles that I've written about some of the things that I've learned and some of the things that I have struggled to understand about my own family tree. Some of them can be difficult conversations, as I've titled them, and there's definitely a lighter side about learning who you are as well. And in order to do that, you just go to medium.com and subscribe to the DNA Journey. As I post new articles, if you subscribe, you'll get a notification that there's something new to read and you can join in the process. And I am absolutely open to answering questions and helping you figure out how to deal with all of this information and know how to do this path for yourselves. I will be coming back for more information in 2023 to share more of what I'm learning and also to help you go through this process as well. So feel free to reach out. You can also email me. at VibeMistress at soul-sanctuary.net for more information about this series, Blood at the Roots, and all the different things that I'm doing through my nonprofit organization. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is your first episode of Blood at the Roots for 2023, but I promise it will not be the last. And I hope to see you back for more in the future.